Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about why too many different exercises in your routine can be counterproductive to progress. Let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skill at my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. And when we talk about things like exercise minimalism, people will think you're just being lazy. You want to do less training. More training is better. And you have to look at people like that and go, no, actually the other type of training is lazier. And it might sound like a contradiction at first, but let me point that out. What's lazier to you? If you really want to think about in terms of work, if a person does 30 sets of heavy squats every week versus a person who does 5 heavy sets of squats every week, 5 sets of leg press, and 5 sets of leg extensions, do you call the guy who did 30 sets of squats lazy? Or do you call the guy who only did 15 total sets? And one of which was a complete fluff exercise that has almost no value and is no real effort. Who's lazy? So you see the problem with that philosophy is that people don't understand when we're talking about exercise minimalism, we're not talking about training minimalism. No one ever suggested that you shouldn't train a lot or that you shouldn't have an appreciable amount of volume. What's being suggested is that doing too many exercises, particularly less effective exercises, really isn't ideal. And if anything, the other philosophy is more of a mindset of laziness, if we want to go there. But here's the question I would ask people. Does it matter if something is lazy if it produces 100% of the possible results? In other words, if we were to look at some of the data out there and we find that a muscle doesn't grow if you do more than 10 sets, is a person who does 10 sets instead of doing 20, are they lazy or are they smart? Like, why would you work for free? I can understand the idea of charity work, but just like you don't go to your job and you don't log an extra 10 hours every week without being paid for them, usually unless you have some other incentive to do so. Maybe it's part of your contract with your employer. I don't know. But the point is, you don't work for free. So at a certain point, some of this isn't even necessarily laziness so much as, okay, let's think about what's effective, what's efficient, what's maximum recoverable volumes, what's the most you can grow from. You get into all these discussions, but let's set that aside. If anyone out there who has training experience doesn't understand what I mean when I talk about less exercise selection, if you were to take a couple of groups of people, starting at similar points, maybe they built just a little bit of a base, they have a few months of actual training under their belt, because you can't really train sometimes early on. And you were to take one group of people and put them on some sort of body part split, where you do 5 different exercises Monday through Friday, right? You have a chest day, have an arm day, whatever, but you do 5 sets of 5 different exercises every time you're in the gym, right? So you're talking about 25 total work sets, 5 different lifts on each day, times 5, so that's 25 different exercises, right? That's a lot of volume. If you were to take those people with all these random, particularly smaller movements all in there, and you were could compare them to a group of people who you just had every week focus on 3 exercises, I don't know, how about the weighted dip, the weighted pull-up, and the deadlift? And you had them do as much volume on those 3 lifts as they could recover from every week, maybe up to 4 or 5 days a week. 3 would probably be more ideal, but let's say you did it Monday through Friday also. And you pushed them to their limits on those exercises, and you worked with each one of them and focused on progression and as much workload as they can handle while still getting stronger. Now, if we were to do this for several months, let's say 6 months, which of these 2 groups of people do you think is going to gain more muscle? The people who focused on the 25 different exercises, or the people who just got really strong and did a lot of workload on those 3 big movements? The people who did those 3 big movements are probably going to be bigger. They're probably going to be bigger. Some people would say, well, no, all the others are giving more variety, and variety has been shown to sometimes increase muscle growth. Yeah, but not excessive variety. And if you're putting too much focus on too many different movements, you get slower progress. In other words, your exercise variety doesn't need to come in the form of ultra high volume on each exercise. The reason a little more exercise selection can sometimes cause more muscle growth is what? The fact that sometimes there are muscle fibers in that muscle that don't get worked completely, or they can't be recruited on a certain exercise, and adding a second or a third exercise in can work the muscle in a slightly different way that gets a few of the muscle fibers that maybe weren't activated due to the other movement pattern, right? But how much of that do you really need? In other words, if you've already done 5 sets of one exercise and then you need a smaller movement to come in and maybe work it at a different angle, but you've done 5 limit sets, do you really need to do a bunch of other sets of the other exercise? No. You probably only need 1, 2, maybe 3 sets of the secondary exercise to go ahead and totally fatigue those remaining fibers. Because what you need to understand, our volume and things like that are done to recruit as many muscle fibers as possible. That's why we do multiple sets, to make sure that we're getting all the available muscle fibers. And at a certain threshold, yeah, you're not going to be able to recruit new fibers. And there's going to be some in any given muscle that one movement pattern might not always reach. But you throw in the secondary one, all the other muscle fibers are already fatigued. You're not needing to go through and fatigue the entire muscle through again to get maximum growth. So you don't necessarily need the huge amount of volume on the secondary exercise. And that's what we come to with why the lower selection has its benefits. It's about training movement patterns. Because at the end of the day, yeah, we should be thinking in terms of muscle activation, right? We should be thinking in terms of muscle activation. We should care about recruiting as much muscle fibers as possible. But do you get that always through exercise selection, or do we get that through getting stronger? In other words, I am sometimes criticized by some people. One of the criticisms I do get is that I actually place more importance on exercise selection than some of the best coaches in the world. And people need to understand that. A lot of coaches out there might tell you it doesn't matter. When we're dealing with hypertrophy, there's no difference between a dumbbell bench, a barbell bench, and a weighted dip. In other words, it doesn't matter which one you pick. That's what a lot of coaches would tell you, who are very good coaches. Why does it matter? They all work the same muscles. Pick one. So I am in the group of people who actually put a bigger focus on exercise selection than a lot of coaches do. But they do want you to pick one. Why? Because the programming is what matters. The training programming, the progression. Well, if you look at it from that perspective, you understand that it's progression that matters. It's the training programming that matters more than the exercise selection. What does that tell you? It tells you that we know that getting stronger on a lift is what's going to give you the most available muscle fibers. In other words, yes, there will be differences between a weighted dip, a declined dumbbell bench press, and a barbell flat bench in terms of how the muscle fibers are recruited. There will be some difference, but they're all still the same muscles are worked for the most part, give or take. If you get really strong at one of those, you're going to be able to generate more workload. You're going to be able to generate more total fatigue in the muscle if you can get stronger on one movement pattern. And that's the point we come to. If you're doing too many different exercises, your focus in learning the movement patterns gets thrown all over the place. But if you're focused on just one major exercise for any given movement pattern, at any one time, all of your adaptation and motor unit learning is going to go into that movement pattern. In other words, you're going to get stronger at it faster. And as you get stronger at a movement pattern, what happens? You're able to not only lift more weight, you're able to generate more workload. In other words, as you get stronger, your 1 rep max doesn't just go up on the dip or the bench press. Your 5 sets of 10 max goes up. In other words, we have a maximum weight that we can do not just 10 reps, but 5 sets of 10 with, right? We do. We have a limit. Heaviest weight we could do that with. Isn't that going to go up as you get stronger also? Of course it is. So your ability to generate more work in every single set is going to go up. Well, that's what's going to stimulate the most muscle growth. You see the problem, if we're wasting too much time doing too many different movement patterns, we're not generating maximum workloads. And if we're not generating maximum workloads, we're going to have more junk volume. You have to have more junk volume to get all the available muscle fibers. We're going to generate more fatigue that's harder to recover from. We're not going to be able to train as often, are we? So if you're focusing most of your efforts into just a handful of movements and getting as strong as humanly possible, and it doesn't have to be all the time. I'm not saying you have to pick that one movement and do it for 3 years straight. They can be rotated through blocks. But if you're focusing on too many different movements for that same similar pattern or those same muscles, you are going to get less total training effect and less adaptation and less strength gain. That's why you see guys like Bugenhagen, perfect example. You notice he'll focus on 1 or 2 movements every single day, and he might pick that 1 or 2 movements for 3 weeks straight. Then he'll change it after 3 weeks, but he spends that entire 3 weeks obsessively focusing on that one movement and generating as much strength and work capacity as he can on that exercise as an extreme focus. Is he big and strong? Is he jacked? Yeah, he's pretty jacked, and it works pretty well for him. And he is taking that to the most extreme example I've ever seen, but it does work. And is he bigger than tons of the guys who focus on doing 37 different exercises every week? Hell yeah, he is. Because he understands that it is about performance on a handful of movements. That's what's going to get you really jacked. That's how you get there. All right, guys, so that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.